He's a Denver native, born of Denver natives, a former chief deputy DA. He is an active Colorado trial lawyer who has also worked in the media for decades. Bright, independent, and full of fun. He is part of 710 KNUS now. This is the Craig Silverman Show.
Oh, what a world, what a day, what a life, what a remarkable life has been led by Dr. Jasser. Jasser is a courageous man. He's a prominent Muslim leader. He just came back from Washington, D.C. to his home in Arizona. He was at the Summit for Muslim Voices of Reform Against Islamism. Dr. Jasser's group is the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. It's my pleasure to go to the VIP line. Welcome back to my show, Dr. M. Jasser. Dr. Jasser, how are you?
Great. It's good to be with you again, Craig. Thank you for having me.
Dr. Jasser, if I recall correctly, you're of Syrian heritage. This situation in Syria must be eating you up. Do you still have relatives over there?
Oh, we sure do. My mom's family, her 6 brothers and sisters and cousins, and really only my immediate family is here. I was born in the U.S., but most of my mother's family stayed there. My dad's family, his immediate family escaped because his father was very politically active against the Ba'athists, and he was in and out of jail. But the remote family, my cousins are still in Aleppo there too. So it's just a horrific war zone.
Yes, and what I like about you, Dr. Jasser, you've lived the American dream. You're a medical doctor. You have a busy practice. In fact, I think you're probably working today on a Saturday. Am I right?
Yes, I am. Because of the travel schedule, I make up for it with some weekend clinics, but it keeps me grounded, and my patients mean the world to me.
What's your medical specialty?
Internal medicine, primary care.
Wow, those guys are smart. You have to know about all the inner workings of the human body. I admire the way you've lived your life, and I admire this group you put together in Washington, D.C. Tell us about the Summit for Muslim Voices of Reform Against Islamism. I put up on my website, my radio website, a copy of the YouTube of you and fellow moderate Muslim leaders arguing for reforms in Washington, D.C. Got a little drowned out by the events of San Bernardino. But tell us what you did in D.C. this week.
Yeah, it was so key. It's been a long time coming. We started putting this together 3 or 4 months ago, but actually a year ago to people say, where are the voices? Where are the movements? And we've all had our own organizations, but the organizations that we consider, I know we use the term moderate, I actually don't like that. I think it should be, there's a firewall we determine between the organizations that are working towards the solution versus those that are part of the problem. And that firewall is the declaration we put together. We had a summit for 2 days. We rolled up our sleeves and figured out what are the core principles that separate us from the radicals and the extremists. And basically, we laid them out in 3 areas. One is human rights, second is secular governance, and the third is related to peace and national security and counterterrorism. And in each of those areas, we laid out some simple ideas that people can take this declaration to the local mosques, to the Islamic organizations, and ask them, are you ready to join this coalition that made these statements? And if they say yes, they're part of the solution for reform. Our movement is a Muslim reform movement. It's bipartisan or nonpartisan. You'll see in the press conference we did yesterday at the end, releasing a declaration, there are feminist groups, liberals, conservative groups. It's not a political thing. It's sort of where America was at its founding, which is about separation of mosque and state. We said we reject the Islamic State, not only ISIS, but all Islamic states. We reject violent jihad. We call for a separation of mosque and state. We call for the equality of men and women. We call for the respect of the UN Declaration of Human Rights and not the Cairo Declaration of Human Rights, which is all based in Sharia. We reject the institutionalization of Sharia. And we actually said we believe Sharia is man-made and not God's law. So these are principles that will be controversial, but that's how all reform movements are. But we also feel that it's the only solution to counterterrorism. Counterterrorism is a whack-a-mole program unless you get, people ask you, how did these 2 in San Bernardino get radicalized? The question actually people ask is, how did they get operationalized? when did they all of a sudden become part of ISIS's operation to do something on the battlefield, which is to kill these poor innocent
But
Americans?
I think you're right, Dr. Jasser, to go to the mosques. How many mosques are there in America right now, roughly?
Around 3,000, they say.
And so you're going to take your new organization's proposal to each mosque, and they're either going to approve it or not approve it, and that's how you will judge them?
Yep. We went to a group of us. I was in a meeting, but a group of us went to the mosque on Massachusetts Avenue, which is a Saudi-affiliated mosque, the main mosque near the National Cathedral in Washington. And we have a little video online at our Facebook page you can see. They basically ripped it off the door, and the women that are in our group asked to be able to enter. They said, no, it's in a different entrance. And it was just a little metaphor of the greater problem. But they did read it, and we asked for their response, and we'll check back with them. So if they're silent or if they reject it, I don't care what we can call it. The bottom line is they're not part of the solution.
Do you have any mosques that have accepted it?
Not yet. We just rolled out yesterday, so we'll hold them accountable. Well, we're going to post it, the declaration, on our website. And, we're in...
What is your website? Because people are going to want to follow this. I know I am. I want to see how many mosques you get to go along with your proposal. What's the website we can follow this at?
AIF, as in forum, AIFdemocracy.org. And our Facebook page is Muslim Reform Movement. If you just look up Muslim Reform Movement, you'll find that declaration. Or at my Facebook page, we have a lot of social media activity. Our Twitter hashtag is @TheMuslimReform. And bottom line is that it doesn't have to be Muslims that only do this, because our 15, I think we have 7 or 8 major cities covered, including Portland, Toronto, Washington. We had a member from Denmark who's in the parliament in Denmark. He's going to take it back to Copenhagen. We had an imam from London who participated. But bottom line is anybody can take this declaration and show it to your Muslim colleagues. And if they reject it, whether it's in Denver or anywhere, if they reject it, then say, look, you might not be able to argue with them since you're not a Muslim, but you know that you can send them our way and have a debate with us as to how we can expose that they're part of the problem.
Wow, I've heard that 80% of the mosques are financed and the clergy is supplied by Saudi Arabia. You just brought up the mosque in D.C. that's financed by Saudi Arabia, and that's a big problem that I have with Islam. That's the repository of Islam. Mecca, Medina, that's where Muhammad was from, and the way they conduct business over there with allowing plural marriages and the criminality of apostasy, the stonings, the beheadings. I worry about that. And if they're in control of the mosques in the United States, am I right to be worried?
Absolutely. Their control started in the 60s and 70s, and now it's sort of like the poisonous tree that you plant and you don't need to feed anymore because the country's, our own water is keeping those plants alive. So the funding after 9/11 became much less. But let me give you one example, Craig. Look at all the terrorist activities that have happened against our country and against the West. 99% of them, I can't think of any of them, have been Sunni. There haven't been any Shiite. The reason is the money, right? And we're looking now, what did President Obama do a month ago? We're going to look at releasing $150 billion of Iranian sanctioned money. And it's not that the Khomeinis don't produce terror networks. They sure do. It's called Hezbollah. It's through the region. It's called Esed, other radical terror networks. But the bottom line is that we have had a bit of a firewall because of the sanctions. The Treasury Department shut down $500 million Iranian operation in New York called the Alevi Foundation. So that is one of the things if you think it's bad now, the gates of Shiite terrorism against the West is going to also start to open because of the sanction relief that was part of the nuclear deal. So the money is very important. Qatar Foundation is Sunni and has been in bed with the Brotherhood for some time. So our battle is not only against the ideas of Islamism, but the mafia of these countries, of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation led by the Saudis, that are royal families that claim to be against the Brotherhood, but basically are feeding the drug of Islamism into their people so that they can then say they're victims of the meth addicts that are driving intoxicated.
Well, I wish you nothing but success, but what happens if you don't get any mosques or very few to join your cause? What will you conclude at that point?
Well, I think the next step is, how did Reformation happen in most states? It related to public pressure. We're not expecting the mosque to lead this. That's why Americans say, well, where are the imams? Most Reformations, our founding fathers were not priests. Our founding fathers in America were lay intellectuals that loved their faith, that decided that the establishment of religion was what was destroying the organized aspect of Christianity. So ultimately, Islam needs the same thing. I think non-Muslims need to start weighing in. The president needs to start calling it Islamic in order to wake up Muslims that they have a problem and get past the denial. And then once America starts taking sides within the House of Islam, we can start to develop a strategy against our enemies who are fueling political Islamism, and then figure out who our foes, our friends are within the House of Islam, to develop more coherent strategies in Syria and elsewhere. I mean,
right, but the mosques are important. What happens? Do you know whether your mosque in Arizona will approve your resolution coming out of D.C.?
I doubt it. I've debated the imams here twice on similar issues about political Islam, and they give you apologetics about the Caliphate, about jihad. You can go to a letter online called the Letter to Baghdadi that the Muslim Brotherhood type imams wrote to Baghdadi, calling him out as a radical because of the way he imposed the Caliphate, because of the way he does jihad, saying he doesn't have the authority. And they say in there, jihad is obligatory. The Caliphate is an obligatory part of Islam. So imams that sign that kind of a crazy apologetic letter, which tries to, I think, confuse the West, I don't believe are going to sign a simple declaration where we say there's no more any need for caliphate, no longer will we ever support any Islamic state, no violent jihad. I just don't think they'll ever sign anything as clear.
Right. So what are you going to do personally? Are you going to remain a member of the mosque even though they reject your common sense and hopeful resolution?
Absolutely. I mean,
so you're going to quit your mosque, and then what are you going to do?
Well, I think the solution is later to divide and form more modern, reform-minded mosques, but we still need the grassroots movement, because right now we have a leadership of courageous groups that have decided to lead a reform. Then, eventually, as more pressure is put on these Muslim communities to start to wake up, the 85% that don't go to mosque, then we can start to form Islamic organizations with more of a grassroots movement that do form new mosques.
How can they be Islamic? I mean, who speaks for Islam? I would think the religious leaders, and I know you are an expert in the field of medicine and you're a dynamic presence in the media, but do you consider yourself an expert on Islam?
You know, one of the tenets in our 2 pages is that every Muslim owns and has an equal opportunity to express criticism or love of the faith, of the Quran, and its interpretation. So Islam is similar to Judaism in its sense that imam or rabbi means teacher. It doesn't mean controller of the message of God. We each have equal access to God, and we argue based in reason, not based in clerical supremacism or elitism of thought. You know, it's just like in medicine. Yeah, I might have an MD, but I give my patients recommendations. I don't force my treatments upon them. So it's, you know, I think that's a very important part of the conversation.
I would count on you to study the medical textbooks. Have you studied the Quran? Because honestly, there was a rally at the local mosque where people of different faiths came together on Parker Road, and I heard one of the imams that run that mosque say, people don't understand Islam. And then I'm thinking, well, what about Baghdadi? He's got a doctorate in Islamic studies from Baghdad U. He probably does understand Islam, don't you think? I mean, why do you, Dr Jasser, think you know more about Islam than Baghdadi, the head of the Islamic State?
That's a great question, and that's why I debate ISIS folks all the time on my Twitter feed that attack me, and I respond to them. You know, I tell them when they say that in their organization, Sharia for Belgium, Sharia for Australia, they say I'm an apostate. I say, well, who are you, God? You can't determine who is and who is not a Muslim. I mean, there are reasoned arguments to have to these people, in addition to understanding the translation of the Quran that my father taught me. We have imams working with us. You'll see 2 of them in that press conference yesterday that have a very healthy understanding of Sharia. One's working with the Quilliam Foundation, another one's from Ottawa. So we are not doing this blindly. but the clerics were ready to debate them, both inside the mosque and outside. But that's why I think Americans who are non-Muslim don't necessarily need to engage in the debate, but to start to create platforms where they bring us reformists to showcase how we can defeat them in debate.
But can you point to me any of the many dozens of Islamic countries in the world where you would recommend that I go live as a Jewish person or that Kirk go live as a Christian person? Can you point us to the country where Muslims are in charge and it's a good environment for all people?
That's why we're doing this in America. I mean, maybe Indonesia is probably, I've been to Indonesia, it's really a secular country that does separate mosque and state, but they're struggling with corruption issues and other things. You know, and that's why I think that there may only be 3 million Muslims in America, but our task globally in this time of an Arab awakening, there's no laboratory to do this work. There's a motivation to do it in Egypt, where you saw 10 million go to the street to reject the Brotherhood. You saw millions go to the streets in 2009 in Iran and the Green Revolution that were then slaughtered for a few weeks until it went away. So the drive is present in the Middle East, but here we have the laboratory to do a press conference yesterday where we would have all been jailed and whipped this week in Saudi Arabia for saying what we said.
Right.
So, you know, that's why Muslims have to do this work, Craig, in America.
Well, I admire your courage. Let me play you some sound from a guy named Bill Maher, a man of the left, but he's come out against allowing Muslim refugees from your parents' homeland of Syria. Here's what he had to say. I'd like your reaction.
If you are in this religion, you probably do have values that are at odds. This is what liberals don't want to recognize. You may be from a country, as there are many, many Muslim countries that either have Sharia law or want Sharia law. Those values are not our values. This idea that somehow we do share values, that all religions are alike, is bull. And we need to call it bull.
What's your reaction to that, Dr. Jasser?
You know, listen, there's certainly, as much as my heart is, you know, reaches out and I want my family to come here, I also, as far as American security is concerned, realize that despite all the vetting being done by the UN and elsewhere, there is a problem because we're not vetting against jihadists. We're not vetting against that theopolitical ideology. And that's why, again, I'll go back to that 2-page declaration is a tool. Now, some may lie, etc., but listen, we can't allow the narrative of what America stands for to change. So I would disagree with him, as I have with many on the right, about the fact that if we let the narrative that America is going to shut its door to immigration and immigrants, refugees, in the World War II we did not do that. In Vietnam War we did not do that. We opened our doors. But we had ways to vet. Still today the immigration paperwork says, are you a member of the Communist Party? We were checking for political enemy ideology. So right now, we need to check for those who believe in Caliphism, who believe in Islamism, and not let them in. But also, on the other side of that is the Ethicists. You know, we have been allowing threats to come in from the secular fascists of the Middle East for too long, our so-called allies of Saudi Arabia, etc. So we need a much more robust, and the only way to do that is to have a task force of Muslims that are reformist and believe in liberty to start helping our government figure out how to do that. But we can't say no.
Wow, yeah, I admire your courage, and I know you have to get back to your medical practice. Thanks for setting aside the time, but this concept of a caliphate, I'm just starting to learn about it, and is it true that a lot of Muslims believe, according to the Quran and the Hadith, that if a caliphate really does come into existence, that they have an obligation to serve that caliphate, and isn't that what the people in San Bernardino and in Paris were doing? They were serving the caliphate, and doesn't that make it necessary for the United States and or the Western powers to destroy the caliphate, because a certain percentage of Muslims will feel, wow, this is what was prophesied in the Quran, we need to get busy?
Well, two things, quick. We have to destroy them militarily to tell them that they're going to be defeated and they will not win. So that's very key, but that's a military deal. Ideologically, the only way you're going to get Muslims not to gravitate towards this Caliphism or what I call Islamo-patriotism is by putting in their heart what my family put in my heart, which is a love for American patriotism, and why I joined the Navy, which is the only country I would ever die for in the past and in the future is America. And that sense of American patriotism could never be displaced by Islamo-patriotism, because I don't, and that's one of the things in our declaration against violent jihad is all of us said, you know what, we also will publicly say we never want ever to be there to be a Muslim army. There's no need for an army to be identified by one faith. It's about our secular countries that we have loyalty to. That is the central argument that should be part of our counter-radicalization policy in Washington.
Well, I'm going to follow how this petition goes, how the mosques respond. Everybody else, go to American Islamic Forum for Democracy. That's AIFDEMOCRACY, American Islamic Forum for Democracy. Dr. Jasser, really appreciate you joining us again. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.